On April 19th, 1987, a team of scientists did something that had never been done before in the history of wildlife conservation. They caught the last one. The very last California condor flying free in the wild, a bird named AC-9. When they netted him and brought him into captivity, something happened that had never happened before. For the first time in recorded history, an entire species of bird became officially extinct in the wild. Not almost extinct, not endangered, extinct in the wild. Every single California condor left on Earth was now sitting in a cage. 22 birds. That's all that remained of a species that once soared over nearly the entire western half of North America. 22 birds, standing between one of the continent's largest, most ancient flying creatures, and complete disappearance forever. And the decision scientists made next, I pray, was so radical, so controversial, that even some conservationists thought it might be a fatal mistake. Today, we're going inside the extraordinary gamble that brought the California condor back from the edge of oblivion, and the astonishing numbers behind one of the greatest wildlife comebacks in American history. To understand how extraordinary this recovery really is, you first have to understand what was actually at stake. The California condor is the largest land bird in North America. Its wingspan reaches nearly 9.5 feet, nearly 10 feet, tip to tip, wider than almost any other bird on the entire continent. These birds can weigh up to 25 pounds, and they are almost impossibly long-lived. California condors can survive for more than 60 years. Think about that lifespan. A bird that could, in theory, live to see multiple generations of the same human family grow old. For thousands of years, condors ranged across an enormous stretch of the continent, from British Columbia down through Baja California, and once even as far east as Florida. They soared on rising warm air, covering hundreds of miles in a single flight, searching for the carcasses of large animals to feed on. Ancient, majestic, and perfectly adapted to a world that once had far more open wilderness than it does today, but that world was changing fast, and the condor was running out of time. By the mid-20th century, condor populations had begun a steep and alarming decline. Lead poisoning from ammunition fragments left in animal carcasses, pesticides like DDT weakening eggshells until they could no longer support developing chicks. Habitat loss, poaching, every single pressure a species can face hit the condor at once. In 1967, the California condor was officially listed as endangered under federal law. But even with that protection, the decline continued. By 1982, only 22 condors remained in the entire wild population. 22 for a bird that once ruled the skies over half a continent. And the numbers kept falling. By 1985, only 9 wild condors remained. Scientists watched helplessly as one of North America's most iconic birds slid closer and closer to complete extinction. Something had to change, and the plan that conservationists ultimately proposed was almost unthinkable. The idea was simple to describe and agonizing to actually carry out. Capture every single remaining wild California condor, every last one, and bring them into captivity to breed. This decision was deeply controversial. Opponents argued that condors had a right to remain free, that capturing every wild bird would permanently alter the species' natural behavior, that the cost, both financial and ethical, was simply too great to justify. But biologists faced a brutal mathematical reality. If the wild population kept declining at its current rate, there might not be any condors left to save at all. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service moved forward. One by one, the last wild condors were carefully captured and transported to breeding facilities at the Los Angeles Zoo and the San Diego Wild Animal Park. And on April 19th, 1987, the final wild condor, a bird known as AC-9, was captured. For the first time in recorded history, the California condor no longer existed in the wild at all. Every single one was now in human care. 22 birds represented the entire genetic future of the species. If this program failed, there would be no second chance. breeding condors in captivity brought its own extraordinary challenges. Condors don't reach sexual maturity until around 6 years old, and once paired, they typically produce only a single egg every 1 to 2 years. At that rate, rebuilding a species from 22 birds would take far too long. So researchers turned to a technique that sounds almost too strange to be real. They discovered that condors are capable of what's called double clutching. If an egg is removed from the nest shortly after being laid, the parents will often lay a second egg to replace it, sometimes even a third. By carefully removing eggs and incubating them separately, scientists could dramatically multiply the number of chicks produced each breeding season. But this created a new problem. If human caretakers raised these chicks directly, the young condors would imprint on people instead of their own species. They would grow up believing they were human, behavior that could make them unable to survive, breed, or integrate into the wild later on. So caretakers developed something remarkable: hand puppets, carefully shaped and colored to resemble an adult condor's head, every single feeding, every interaction delivered through a puppet, so that from the very first days of life, these chicks would recognize their caretakers not as humans, but as condors. In 1988, just 1 year after the last wild bird was captured, the very first captive-bred condor chick successfully hatched in San Diego. They named her Moloko, a tiny sign that this radical, controversial gamble might actually work. If this incredible turnaround is amazing you, as much as it amazed me, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps stories like this reach more people. The captive breeding program worked far better than many had dared hope. From those original 22 birds, the population began to steadily climb. And in 1992, just 5 years after the species had gone completely extinct in the wild, the first captive-bred California condors were released back into their natural habitat. It was a moment conservationists had worked toward for over a decade, watching a species that had existed only in cages and breeding facilities spread its wings again over open California sky. More releases followed in Arizona, near the Grand Canyon, in Baja California, Mexico. Slowly, deliberately, the condor's range began to expand again. In 2002, something particularly poignant happened. A C9, the very same bird who had been the last wild condor captured back in 1987, was released back into the wild after 15 years in captivity. 15 years that helped make this entire recovery possible. He flew free once more, given a new identification number, but forever remembered as the bird who represented both the end of the wild population and, indirectly, its return. Then, in 2008, the program reached a milestone that once seemed almost impossible. For the first time since the recovery effort began, there were more California condors flying free in the wild than remaining in captivity. Here's what makes this story almost impossible to fully comprehend. As of recent counts, the global California condor population has grown to more than 550 birds, more than 550, from a starting population of just 22. Every single California condor alive today descends from those original 22 birds. Every one, an entire species, rebuilt from a genetic bottleneck so narrow it could have ended everything, standing today as one of the most remarkable conservation recoveries in American history. The species still faces serious challenges. Lead poisoning remains an ongoing threat. The condor remains critically endangered. The work is far from finished, but the number that once stood at 22 now stands at over 550, over half flying free, wild, across California, Arizona, Utah, and Baja California. So the next time you see a massive bird gliding effortlessly on a 9-foot wingspan somewhere over the American West, remember what that bird actually represents. Not just a species that survived, a species that was completely gone from the wild and came back Because instead of accepting extinction as inevitable, a small group of people chose to try something radical, something controversial, something that could have failed completely, and it worked. If this story moved you, subscribe to Birdhearts so you never miss the next incredible survival story hiding in the bird world. And tell me in the comments, did you know an entire species was once completely extinct in the wild before coming back? I'll see you in the next one.